Welcome back to the Ticks and Trades Daily Recap. Sam Morton here with your recap for Wednesday, June 4, 2025. We're going to walk through the game plan, break down what price actually did during the session, go over the futures trades that were possible per the rules, take a look at the trade that I personally took today, update the logs, and then wrap up by coming back to this daily chart to forecast where we might be headed next. Let's get into it. Here were the daily levels posted this morning before the open. The morning game plan called out 596.07 as the potential axis level, not necessarily because of any technical confluence, but because it was the gap left over from yesterday's close. Pre-market price bounced off of that level a couple times, so the assumption was that it might react again if hit during the regular trading session. There was a PMI data release at 10 a.m., and I noted that it might add some volatility. This is what the market looked like before the opening bell, at least the levels on the 1-minute chart. Here's how it played out. The astute observer might notice that there's another level here at 595.65. You'll see that level added during the live trade that I took. We'll get to that in a minute, and I'll explain what it is. But the only level that was hit was that gap at 596.07. So the SPY came down into it early on. It was 10:09 a.m. Eastern. That triggered a rules-based long trade in the E-mini futures, and they bounced. So a clean base hit, 4 points, pretty textbook. That was the only valid level hit today. They did come back down into it and touch that level again after 12 p.m., but per our strategy, the first hit is the best hit. So that second touch over here was not traded. So one official base hit if you were playing by the rules. You might ask about this trend line because price did hit it later in the day. I wouldn't necessarily have traded the trend line. It was there for reference. They got under it at the end of the day, so that probably means something. And once again, we'll talk about this level down here. It comes from another trend line. But even so, it was after 3:30 p.m. Notice the time. They got down into it 3:41 or so, a near miss. They got into it about 9 minutes to spare before the closing bell. Not going to take a trade this late in the day. So this is the trade that I took. This is a recording of it. I did not take that trade down at 596.07. I was tied up at the office, busy with something, and didn't want to enter something that I thought might take a while to develop. But in hindsight, I missed that opportunity because of a trend line that was underneath. So here's me just looking at this area to see if it worked. Obviously it did, but I wasn't in that trade. But I jumped into a trade. It was around 10:43. It happens fast, so this whole recording is not sped up that much, just so we could see the details. I jumped on board as they were falling after this initial rally here. Sold 6 contracts short, and as they were rolling over here, not something I typically advocate doing, just jumping on board like this, but I saw some things happening that basically said to me that the bears probably wanted to get price farther down at some point in the day. And I just thought pulling a few points on the short side up there would be relatively easy, so I did. So I talked through it there, but that was about 3.5 points or so. So I put the 595.65 level, that's the magenta color, after the fact, and I realized that was kind of the money spot. Later in the day, that was tested a couple times. I never got down to it quite precisely for the rest of the day, but I think there's something to it. We'll look at that when we go back to the daily chart. But that was my one trade for the day, 3.5 points on 6 contracts. Tracking log is pretty easy. Here's the level that was hit if you're playing by the rules. We're looking at the first log here, 596.07, 4 points or more, but 4 points is just the minimum base hit. And you can look at all the metrics and see where we are at so far in 2025. And then over on the Sam's trades, this is the level that I've traded. Well, the SPY was coming down. They were right about 597.08 just to track this accurately. And I jumped on the short side and E-minis, pulled 3.5 points, 10.50 before commissions. Circling back around to the daily chart. So the SPY closed today right around 595.90. And they were right at a trend line that was not on the board, mentioned a few times already. I'll bring it back up right now. So this trend line was something I did have on one of my analysis charts. I really should have transferred it over because if we zoom into say a 5-minute chart, price came down. We had the gap up here. This was the 597.06, or sorry, the 596.07 level. But anyway, they spiked it and they went down to this trend line. So really that level at 595.65 or so, that's where that would have come from. And I'll show you where this comes from. But just to point out, that was pretty important. So the bears were trying to get down below this, and they couldn't do it. I don't think it's a coincidence that they closed right on top of this thing. So this trend line is going to rise slightly tomorrow. So it could come into play tomorrow. So basically, if the bulls can close hourly candles above this zone area, then we could see price go towards 600 eventually. If they get below, the bears could probably have an easier time pulling price down. But there's other things going on. If we go back to the daily chart, I'll zoom out this direction all the way back. This was January 5 of 2022. There's a pivot high. Took a long time for them to come back up, hit it again here. Now, all these pivots mean something, but if you see what price has done since that point in time, there was a lot of action around this trend line. And just so happened that after getting up to it a couple weeks ago, they were above it when they opened this morning. So when they came down into it, once again, 5-minute chart, this is where support came into play. So a big picture is still bullish, I'd say, but a pullback or a pause somewhere in this neighborhood for like a reset wouldn't be too surprising. That's kind of my take now, only a few hours after the closing bell. It's 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Tomorrow morning, I'll take into consideration what they did in the futures overnight and find levels that we can trade against for the day tomorrow. If you want the levels, just head over to ticksandtrades.com to find out how you can gain access. So that wraps it up for today. Thank you for watching. If it weren't for the relatively small handful of consistent viewers who tune in to each of these recaps, I probably wouldn't be spending the time to make them. So thank you for following along, and I hope you find value in this trading approach. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. We'll get back to it tomorrow morning. I'll see you in the next recap. Trade well.